Greetings, AP Euro students. This is our review for Unit 12 on World War II, looking at the review sheet from top to bottom. How did Nazi ideology shape Nazi foreign policy from 1933 to 1945? Remember, 1933 is when Hitler comes to power. Hitler and the Nazis saw life as a struggle between nations, and success was measured through military power. So the Nazis were committed from the beginning to massive armament, and they abrogated the Versailles Treaty. Also in Mein Kampf, Hitler outlined his belief in the racial superiority of the German people and the need for Lebensraum, the need for living space. And the Nazis pronounced the superiority of the Aryan race, which is this northern Teutonic Nordic supposed race of the Germans, and the inferiority of the Jews and of the Slavs. And Nazi foreign policy before 1939 saw a reclaiming of lost German land. You have a remilitarizing of the Rhineland. You have the Anschluss, the forced merger with Austria. Remember, Hitler is from Austria. You have the Sudetenland crisis, which is Hitler's threatening to invade the Sudetenland. There's about 3 million Jews, 3 million Germans, which were left behind on the other side of the Czech border when Czechoslovakia was created out of the Austrian and German empires at the end of World War I. And Hitler signs a non-aggression pact with Russia in 1939, and Hitler supports Franco, who's the Falangist or the fascist leader of Spain during the Spanish Civil War. And Hitler enters into the tripartite pact, better known as the Axis Agreement, between Berlin and Rome and Tokyo, or Germany and Italy and Japan. Foreign policy after 39. Remember, September 1, 1939 is the German invasion of Poland, which brings England and France into the war. And while Hitler is invading Poland, the western part of Poland, keep in mind here, Stalin is invading eastern Poland, and Stalin is going to be grabbing the Baltic states. He's going to be attacking Finland, taking Bessarabia from Romania. And after seizing Poland, there's going to be this Sitzkrieg, this break here during the winter, and after that, Hitler is going to roll into Norway, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg. Be 4 weeks of fighting in France. France will fall, and then you have the Brits get pounded in what's called the Battle of Britain, which is basically the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, is going to be dropping bombs over industrial urban areas. And after Pearl Harbor, you have Hitler disastrously, really long-term, declaring war against the United States, honoring his agreement with the Japanese. And in the summer of 1941, Operation Barbarossa, Hitler with 3.2 million Germans invades Russia. And keep in mind here, Hitler supports like-minded regimes around him. He is going to support dictatorships in Hungary, Romania, and in Bulgaria. And before the final solution is outlined in 1942, you have this German group called the Einsatzgruppen that are following the German army, and they're making up killing squads, killing Jews as they go. What happened on September 1, 1939 is this mutual invasion of Poland by Germany and the USSR. What were political and diplomatic problems faced by these newly created Eastern European nations? First of all, Austria. Austria-Hungary at the end of World War I has lost its empire. Austria is now a rump state, as is Hungary, and pieces of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia have been created out of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And Austria is anti-Semitic. One of the important leaders before the war is this guy Engelbert Dollfuss, who's going to overthrow the government. He's going to shut down parliament, and he's going to make himself dictator. His group is called the Patriotic Front, and he's the leader of the Patriotic Front. He is going to be assassinated, but his successor is going to keep this dictatorship alive until the Anschluss, where Hitler merges Austria with Germany. Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia is really the only democratic state in Eastern Europe at this time, from 1918 to 1945, and, well, gets taken over in 39 by Hitler. But Hitler demands and gets the Sudetenland because of these Germans that are in it. 6 months later, Hitler violates the Munich Pact, in which he says all he wants is the Sudetenland. He'll leave the rest of Czechoslovakia alone, sparing Europe from war. 6 months later, he invades Prague and swallows the rest of Czechoslovakia. And after World War I, one thing to take note of is Czechoslovakia. The name gives it away. This is two groups of people are in this single country, the Czechs and the Slovaks. And the Slovaks are the junior partners. Not so happy to be in this forced merger, but you also have Poles and Magyars in Czechoslovakia, as well as these Germans, who are also unhappy. In Hungary, you have the second communist government after World War I, established in 1919, and it is overthrown in a coup that's aided by the Romanian army that unseats Bela Kun. Bela Kun is the communist leader of Hungary, and he flees off to the USSR. And during World War II, Hungary will be invaded by the Germans. Poland is created in 1919 by way of the Versailles Treaty, and they're going to fight wars with the USSR and Lithuania, these brief border wars, at shortly after creation. And Poland has about a third of its population are not Poles. The people who are unhappy to be in Poland. You have Lithuanians, you have Germans, and you have Ukrainians, as well as the population, about 10% Jewish. General Pilsudski is going to launch a coup against the government in 1926. So one of the problems, big picture here in Eastern Europe, is you have no tradition of democracy. You have no tradition of self-government. You have ethnic divisions, and these new borders are going to impede trade, are going to impede commerce and upset economic stability as the empires evolve and these new small countries are created. What was the impact of World War II on the lives of European women? Well, for one thing, women suffered with men. They suffered food shortages, they suffered from bombing, they suffered from invasion. Jewish women certainly suffered from the Holocaust. And before the war, Hitler and Mussolini had encouraged women to have babies. They were encouraged basically to stay home. But during the war, women are called to do the work of men who are now in uniform. And during the war, women are working in factories. Women are working on farms. Women are working in the military as nurses and doing non-military roles, clerical roles, again, nursing roles, perhaps doing telephone operator jobs. And some women on various sides are working with the resistance. And in London, women are sending their children off to the countryside to avoid getting bombed. How did the following contribute to Germany's defeat in World War II? Some economic reasons. Well, a waste of human capital by basically excluding the Jews from society and killing them. A lot of money wasted on the final solution. You have Allied bombing is laying waste to a lot of German cities and the factories, and that's sort of the plan. You have severe shortages of fuel. Hitler never does capture the Caucasus oil fields, and when he's pushed back, that was probably his best shot at getting oil. There's no oil, natural fuel. There's some synthetic fuel in Germany. And this lack of appreciation and underestimation for the ability of the Americans to become this arsenal of democracy. When Hitler declares war against the United States, he's basically declaring war against the party that has the biggest industrial capacity and will have the greatest industrial output of weaponry during the war, a lot of it directed against him by 1945. Diplomatic reasons contributing to Germany's defeat in World War II. Well, just like Germany had a weak ally in World War I in Austria, Germany had a weak ally in Italy, and they've got to bail the Italians out in Albania and Yugoslavia and in North Africa. And the invasion of Russia, which breaks this non-aggression pact with the Soviets, is in retrospect seen as a disaster, sort of akin to Napoleon's earlier invasion of Russia, and again declaring war on the U.S., which now is part of the big three allies against Germany. Some military reasons. Well, military overstretch. The Germans are everywhere. They have to garrison a lot of places, and they've got a lot of people fighting them on a lot of fronts. You have the fighting on two fronts against the Russians, and then ultimately on the other side against the Americans and the Brits and the French, against three powerful armies totally here. Invasion of Russia sees ultimately 3 million Germans are going to die because of this Operation Barbarossa. And Allied industry is vastly superior collectively against, in balance against German war production. German submarines were unsuccessful because of the convoys, and it's been argued that if Hitler had, put more of his effort into submarines rather than attacking the Russians, or rather than putting his energy and capital into surface ships, that may have paid off. He didn't fully utilize submarine warfare as he could have. And then you have Operation Torch, which is the Allied invasion of North Africa, which becomes Operation Husky, which is the leapfrog into Sicily, and then Operation Avalanche, which is the invasion of Italy. And the Italians do throw in the towel. Winston Churchill is correct that the Italians are weak and will surrender, but the Germans don't. The Germans move into Italy, and about a fifth of the German army will be tied down for the duration of the war in Italy, keeping the Allies at bay as they slowly and relentlessly move up the Italian boot. Why didn't France and Italy just stand up to Hitler when he was still relatively weak, when he's moving into the Rhineland and Anschlussing Austria and threatening the Sudetenland? Well, one reason is both parties, both France and England, were militarily weak, where Hitler had been building up his military. And England and France lost each approximately somewhere in the range of 1 million men each, killed and wounded. And there was this desperation. There was this huge desire to avoid war. And some people thought it wasn't unreasonable what Hitler was asking, moving his troops into the part of Germany that's across the river from France, moving troops into an area, the Ostreich, this Eastern Kingdom of what? Eastern Kingdom of the Germans. Well, why shouldn't Austria perhaps merge with Germany if they're all German speakers and German culturally? And then you have the Sudetenland with these 3 million Germans. So a lot of people weren't willing to go to war to defend a country, say Czechoslovakia, that didn't exist 20 years earlier. And in France, at the start of the war, the French government is divided. You have this Popular Front, which falls, I want to say it's in 1937, this socialist communist government, and then you have a right-wing government coming in, and you've got strikes by leftist labor unions, and France is just terribly politically divided. And the right-wingers are going to become the core of this Vichy traitor government that will be installed by the Nazis after France quits the war. Significant is some World War II conferences. The Atlantic Charter in 1941 is signed by President FDR and Churchill. And this is before we join, before the United States joins the war. This is before Pearl Harbor. And it's a statement of purpose. It's a statement that this is not a war of any territorial gain on our part, but it's a war for self-determination. It's a war for freedom, for democracy. And it's basically throwing down the gauntlet. I mean, we're officially neutral, but we're increasingly becoming more involved in helping the Brits and kind of tilting things towards the Brits and away from the Germans. England in 1939 is going to see the repeal of the American embargo. You have cash and carry. Later on, you have the destroyers for bases deal. You have Lend-Lease. You have active American pursuit of U-boats and helping the Germans hunt them down in the North Atlantic. The Casablanca Conference after Operation Torch. Churchill and FDR are going to meet again, and the agreement is that the Allies will seek unconditional surrender of the Axis powers. They do not get to make any terms, any offers. They surrender, and then they receive their terms. And the Tehran Conference is an agreement to open a second front, what Stalin feels is a true second front. Granted, there is a second front in North Africa and in Italy, but Stalin wants a second front on the northwestern part of Europe, basically France, to help take the pressure off of the Russians on the Eastern Front. And the Tehran Conference ultimately is going to lead to this agreement to launch D-Day, which is June 6, 1944. The Yalta Conference, Germany is, just about beat here. And Yalta is in the Crimean Peninsula in southern Russia. And here you have Joseph Stalin will be meeting with Churchill and Roosevelt. By the way, the Tehran Conference was Churchill, Roosevelt, and FDR. The Yalta Conference is going to agree to divide Germany into 4 zones of occupation. The Russians are going to, and I'm using Russians interchangeably here with Soviets, the Soviets are going to promise democratic elections in Poland, and they're going to promise democratic elections throughout Europe. And of course, the elections are a sham. Communist regimes are forced down the throats of the Eastern Europeans, who from 45 until approximately 1991 at least are going to be communist totalitarian states without what we would call freedom. The USSR is going to agree to fight Japan after Germany surrenders. This is all coming out of Yalta, along with agreement to that there will be a Security Council set up at the UN that is being planned. And the Security Council is basically the 5 parties which are going to fight against the Axis, and that in the end is going to be the United States, France, Britain, Russia, and China. How is the Spanish Civil War a preview? How is it a foreshadowing of the coming Second World War? Well, you have a democratic government attacked by a fascist dictator. You have the Democratic side, the Republicans, aided by the USSR, against the Nationalists, supported by the Army, which is going to be aided by the Nazi Germans and the Italian fascists. The war saw mass killings by the communists. About 7,000 priests are killed. And the high number, if you look around the internet, the high number is around 100,000 killed, lower number is closer to 40,000. But mass killings, it's called the Red Terror in Spain. You see aerial bombardment of cities, most famously Guernica, which is that painting painted by Pablo Picasso showing this Basque town in northern Spain, which has been obliterated by the Condor Legion. And these are the German flyers in support of Francisco Franco. Franco is the dictator who's leading the army against this elected left-wing government that has all these communists in it. And Franco will win, and he's going to serve until as president of Spain until he dies in 1975. Well, there you have it. There's our quick review of World War II. So, hope this helps. Signing out.